Every species in the galaxy had a warning about humans, not the kind written in data logs or carved into stone tablets on ancient worlds. No, this was the kind of warning that passed through whispers, through the trembling voices of merchants at deep space stations, through the nervous laughter of soldiers who had seen too much. The warning was simple. Never corner a human. Never threaten what a human has chosen to protect. And above all, never assume that a single human standing alone is actually alone. Because the moment you believe a human is weak, that is the exact moment your empire begins to fall. This is the story of how one alien girl learned that truth, how one human changed the fate of an entire world, and how the galaxy was reminded once again why they should have listened to the warnings. The planet was called Velhari. It was a small world, barely a dot on the galactic trade maps, sitting at the edge of the outer ring where the stars grew thin and the darkness between them felt heavier than anywhere else. Velhari was not important to the great empires. It had no rare minerals. It had no strategic military position. It had no advanced technology. What it had was life. Simple, quiet, beautiful life. The Velhari people had lived on their world for over 12,000 years. They were a gentle species. Their skin carried a soft blue tint, like the color of a calm ocean under morning light. Their eyes were large and silver, built for seeing in the dim light of their distant sun. They stood shorter than most galactic species, barely reaching the chest of an average human. Their bodies were slender, almost fragile-looking, with long fingers designed for weaving, crafting, and creating rather than fighting. The Velhari had no army. They had no warships. They had no weapons factories. For 12,000 years, they had never needed any of it. Their world sat so far from the main trade routes and power centers of the galaxy that no one had ever bothered to come looking for trouble. They lived in peace. They built their villages along the edges of vast crystal lakes that reflected the pale purple sky. They grew food in terraced gardens carved into the sides of gentle hills. They sang songs that echoed through the valleys in the evening when their twin moons rose above the horizon. It was a peaceful existence. A quiet one, and it was about to be destroyed. The Dracarath arrived without warning. Their fleet dropped out of hyperspace in the middle of the night cycle, and the sky above Velhari lit up with the glow of 200 warships, hanging in low orbit like predators circling wounded prey. The Dracarath were conquerors. That was not an insult or an exaggeration. It was simply what they were. Their entire civilization was built on the principle that strength was the only law that mattered. They were massive creatures standing nearly 3 meters tall, with thick armored skin the color of burnt iron. Their faces were broad and flat, dominated by 4 small red eyes that never seemed to blink. Their arms were thick as tree trunks, ending in hands with claws that could tear through light vehicle armor. They moved with a slow, deliberate heaviness that made the ground shake under their feet. Every Dracoroth was born into the military. Every Dracoroth lived to serve the expansion of their empire, and every Dracarath believed with absolute certainty that the weak existed only to serve the strong. They had carved a path through the outer ring for the last century, swallowing up small worlds one by one, worlds that had no one to protect them, worlds that the galactic community had forgotten about or simply did not care enough to defend. Velhari was next on their list. The first day was chaos. The Dracarath did not send diplomats. They did not send messages. They sent drop pods, hundreds of them, screaming through the atmosphere like burning meteors, slamming into the ground around the largest Velhari settlements. The pods cracked open and Dracarath soldiers poured out, armed with plasma rifles and heavy pulse cannons. They marched through the villages without mercy. The Velhari had no idea what was happening. Many of them had never even seen an alien before, let alone an armed soldier. They ran. They screamed. They tried to hide in their homes, in the caves near the lakes, in the forests beyond the hills, but there was nowhere to run. The Dracarath were systematic. They surrounded each village, cut off every escape route, and then moved in. They did not kill everyone. That was not their way. Dead populations were useless. They needed workers. They needed bodies to mine, to build, to serve. So they captured them. Thousands of Velhari were rounded up in the first hours. Families were separated. Children were pulled from their parents. Elders who moved too slowly were kicked to the ground and left in the dirt. By the end of the first day, the capital settlement of Velhari, a place called Sephara, had been occupied. The Dracarath commander, a massive warrior named Vok Faran, set up his command post in the center of the town, right in the middle of the great plaza where the Velhani had gathered for centuries to celebrate their festivals and sing their songs. Now the plaza was filled with Dracorath soldiers, heavy equipment, and the sound of boots on stone. Vok-Tharan sat in a makeshift throne, watching the captured Velhani being herded past him like livestock. He felt nothing for them. They were small. They were weak. They had no weapons, no defenses, no fight in them at all. This was the easiest conquest he had ever led. Among the captured was a young Velhani woman named Liara. She was 23 years old by the standard galactic calendar, though she looked younger because of the delicate features that all Velhani shared. Her skin was a deeper shade of blue than most, like the color of the lakes at twilight, and her silver eyes held a sharpness that set her apart from the others around her. Liara was not a soldier. She was not a leader. She was a teacher. She worked with the youngest children in Sahara, teaching them to read, to count, to understand the stories of their ancestors. She was kind and patient and soft-spoken, but something inside her burned differently than the others. Where the rest of the Velhani had collapsed into despair and silence, Liara felt something else growing in her chest. It was small at first, like a tiny flame, but with every hour that passed, with every scream she heard, with every child she saw crying, that flame grew hotter. It was anger, pure, raw, desperate anger. And she had no idea what to do with it because she had never felt anything like it before in her entire life. On the third day of the occupation, Liara made a decision. It was not a smart decision. It was not a calculated decision. It was the kind of decision that only someone with nothing left to lose would make. She was going to resist. She did not know how. She did not have weapons. She did not have training. She did not even have a plan. But she could not sit in the dirt anymore and watch her world be torn apart. She started small. She began passing messages between the captive groups, whispering information about guard rotations and supply movements. She encouraged others to hide food, to share resources secretly, to keep their spirits alive. She organized small acts of defiance. Nothing dramatic. A stolen supply crate here, a sabotaged piece of equipment there. Enough to cause problems, but not enough to draw serious attention. For 2 weeks, it worked. The Dracorath noticed the disruptions but dismissed them as minor inconveniences. They could not imagine that these small, fragile creatures could organize any real resistance. But then Lyra went too far. She helped a group of 30 Velhani children escape from a labor camp on the outskirts of Sathara. She had been planning it for days, mapping out the gaps in the patrol routes, finding a path through the old drainage tunnels beneath the settlement. The escape itself went perfectly. The children made it to the forests, but the Dracorath tracked them. They found the tunnel. They traced the plan back to Lara, and they were furious. Not because 30 children were a significant loss, but because the idea of resistance from such a weak species was an insult that Vok-Tharan could not tolerate. He ordered Lyra brought to the Great Plaza. He wanted to make an example. They dragged her out at midday when both moons were visible in the pale purple sky. The plaza was filled with Velhani who had been forced to watch. Hundreds of her people, kneeling in rows, their silver eyes wide with fear. Dracorath soldiers stood around the edges, weapons ready, their red eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Liara was thrown to the ground in the center of the plaza, right at the feet of Vok-Tharan. She was bruised and exhausted. Her clothes were torn. Her hands were bound behind her back with energy restraints that bit into her wrists. But she did not cry. She did not beg. She looked up at the massive Dracorath commander with her silver eyes, and there was no surrender in them. Vok-Tharan looked down at her. He was amused. This tiny creature, barely reaching his waist, had caused more disruption in 2 weeks than any resistance force on the last 5 worlds he had conquered. He almost respected it. Almost. He spoke in the common galactic language, his voice deep and rough like stones grinding together. He told the crowd that this was what happened to those who defied the Dracorath. He told them that resistance was pointless, that they were weak, that they had been weak for 12,000 years and would always be weak. He told them that Lara would be executed publicly and that anyone who attempted any further acts of defiance would share her fate. He drew his blade. It was a massive thing, almost as long as Lara was tall, forged from black metal that seemed to absorb the light around it. He raised it above his head. Liara closed her eyes. Not in fear. She had moved past fear days ago. She closed them because she wanted her last thought to be of the children. the 30 little faces she had saved. Whatever happened next, they were free. That was enough. The blade began its downward arc, and then the sky split open. There was no warning, no approaching ship on scanners, no distress signal answered, just a sudden, deafening crack that rolled across the sky like thunder, and a light so bright that every person in the plaza, Velhani and Dracorath alike, shielded their eyes. Something was coming down. Fast. It punched through the clouds, leaving a trail of white fire behind it, and slammed into the plaza about 50 meters from where Liara knelt. The impact sent a shockwave outward that knocked the nearest Dracorath soldiers off their feet. Dust and debris filled the air. For a few seconds, no one could see anything. Then the dust began to settle, and in the center of the impact crater, standing upright as if he had simply stepped off a bus, was a figure. He was not Dracorath. He was not Velhani. He was something else entirely. He was tall for his kind, about 6 feet, though that still made him a full meter shorter than the Dracorath around him. He wore armor, but it was not like anything the Dracorath used. It was sleek and dark, fitted close to his body, with faint lines of blue light running along the joints and edges. A helmet covered his head, smooth and featureless, except for a thin horizontal visor that glowed the same soft blue. He carried no visible weapon. He stood with his hands at his sides, relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world. The dust settled completely, and silence fell over the plaza. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even Voktharan had frozen mid-swing, his blade still raised, his 4 red eyes locked on the stranger. The figure tilted his head slightly, looking at the scene in front of him. He saw the kneeling Velhani. He saw the armed Dracorath soldiers. He saw Liara on the ground, with bound hands and a blade above her head. He took all of it in with a calm, unhurried gaze. Then he reached up and tapped the side of his helmet. It retracted, folding back in smooth panels to reveal his face. He was human. His skin was weathered and tan, with a short beard that had started to go grey at the edges. His eyes were dark brown, deep-set, and carried the kind of quiet intensity that came from years of seeing things most people could not imagine. There was a scar running along his left jawline, thin and white. He looked tired, but not weak. Never weak. He looked directly at Lara. Then he looked at Voktharan and the blade hanging in the air. Then he looked back at Lyra and spoke. His voice was calm and steady, with a warmth that felt completely out of place in the middle of an execution plaza surrounded by armed soldiers. He said 5 words. "Hey, mind if I join?" The silence that followed was absolute. Liara stared at him. Voktharan stared at him. Every Dracorath and every Velhani in the plaza stared at him. He just stood there, hands at his sides, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, as if he had just walked into a party and was asking if there was room at the table. And in that moment, everything changed. Voktharan recovered first. He lowered the blade from above Liara's head and turned his full attention to the human. His 4 red eyes narrowed. He had heard of humans. Every Dracorath commander had been briefed on them during training. Humans were listed in the Galactic Threat Index as a Class 7 species. That was the same classification given to natural disasters and rogue artificial intelligences. But Voktharan had never actually encountered one in person. He had always assumed the threat rating was exaggerated. Looking at this one, standing there without even a visible weapon, he felt confident in that assumption. The human was smaller than him, thinner, softer. He had none of the natural armor, claws, or raw physical power that made the Dracorath the most feared ground force in the Outer Ring. Voktharan almost laughed. He spoke again, his rough voice echoing across the silent plaza. He asked the human who he was and what he was doing on his planet. He used the word his deliberately. Thalhari belonged to the Dracorath now. The human did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the plaza again, slowly, as if he was memorizing every detail. The kneeling Velhani, the armed soldiers, the heavy equipment, the fear in the air. When he finally looked back at Voktharan, the faint smile was gone. His expression had not become angry or aggressive. It had become something else, something quieter and far more dangerous. It was the expression of a man who had already made his decision and was simply giving the other side one last chance to make theirs. He said his name was Cole, just Cole. He said he was passing through this sector when his ship picked up distress signals coming from the planet. He said he had come down to take a look, and he said that what he had found did not sit well with him. Voktharan was losing patience. He told the human that this was a Dracorath military operation and that interfering with it was a death sentence. He told him to leave, now, while he still could. The laugh part was meant as a threat. Cole took it as a joke. He actually chuckled. It was a soft sound, barely audible, but in the dead silence of the plaza, it carried like a gunshot. Then he looked past Voktharan, directly at Liara, who was still kneeling on the ground. He asked her if she was okay. Liara did not know what to say. She did not even know what a human was. She had never seen one. She had never heard of one. All she knew was that this strange creature had fallen from the sky, interrupted her execution, and was now standing between her and the most dangerous warrior on the planet with nothing but a smile and a question. She managed to nod. Cole nodded back. Then he looked at Voktharan one more time. He told the commander that he had a choice. He could release the captives, pack up his army, and leave Valhari. Or he could find out why humans were classified as a Class 7 threat. He said it simply, without pride or anger, the way someone might offer directions to a lost stranger. Voktharan made his choice. He gave the order to kill the human. And Cole, still standing with his hands at his sides, still without a visible weapon, watched 20 Dracorath soldiers raise their plasma rifles and take aim. And he smiled, not a smile of arrogance, not a smile of madness. It was the smile of a man who had been hoping, truly hoping, that it would not come to this, but who was entirely, completely, and terrifyingly prepared for the fact that it had. The soldiers fired, and then the galaxy was reminded why it should have listened to the warnings about humans. 20 plasma bolts screamed across the plaza. They moved fast, faster than any living eye could track, each one burning with enough energy to punch through a centimeter of starship hull plating. They converged on Cole from multiple angles, a kill pattern designed to leave no room for escape, no gap to slip through, no chance of survival. The Dracorath had used this exact firing formation to cut down armored vehicles and fortified positions. Against a single unarmored figure standing in the open, it should have been like using a sledgehammer on glass. Cole moved. It was not the kind of movement the Dracorath expected. They expected him to dive, to roll, to try to run. That was what every other species did when faced with overwhelming fire. Instead, Cole did something that none of the soldiers had ever seen before. He stepped forward, directly into the storm of plasma. His right hand came up from his side, and in his palm something activated. A device, small enough to have been hidden in the seam of his glove, projected a field of shimmering blue light that expanded outward like a blooming flower. The first wave of plasma bolts struck the field and scattered. They did not bounce. They did not deflect in neat angles. They shattered, breaking apart into harmless sparks of light that rained down around Cole like dying fireflies. The shield technology was not Dracorath. It was not from any species in the Outer Ring. It was human engineering. Compact, elegant, and brutally effective. But the shield was only the beginning. Cole kept moving forward, walking through the remaining plasma fire as if it were rain. With his left hand, he reached behind his back and pulled something from a magnetic mount on his armor. It looked like a short cylinder, barely 30 centimeters long, made of the same dark material as his suit. He squeezed it, and it extended in both directions, locking into a staff about 1.5 meters in length. The surface of the staff crackled with white energy that danced along its edges. He reached the nearest Dracorath soldier in 3 seconds. The soldier was still firing, still pulling the trigger of his plasma rifle, unable to process the fact that his target was now standing right in front of him. Cole swung the staff. It connected with the soldier's rifle, and the weapon exploded in a shower of sparks and broken metal. Before the soldier could react, Cole spun the staff and drove the tip into the gap between the Dracorath's chest plates, right where the armor was thinnest. The energy discharge sent the massive soldier flying backward 3 meters, crashing into 2 of his comrades and sending all 3 of them to the ground in a tangle of limbs and broken equipment. The plaza erupted into chaos. The remaining Dracorath soldiers abandoned their formation and rushed at Cole from all sides. They had size. They had numbers. They had the raw physical power of a species bred for war. But Cole had something they did not. He had training. Not the kind of training that the Dracorath received, which was built on overwhelming force and physical dominance. Cole had the kind of training that came from a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting things bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than itself. Humans had never been the biggest predator. They had never been the fastest. They had never been the strongest. But they had survived every single thing the universe had thrown at them, and they had done it by learning, adapting, and refusing to stop. Cole fought like water. He did not stand and brace against the Dracorath charges the way a warrior of their size would expect. He flowed. He redirected. He used their own momentum against them. When a soldier lunged at him with claws extended, Cole sidestepped at the last possible moment and struck the back of the soldier's knee with his staff. The joint buckled and the 3-meter-tall warrior crashed face first into the stone. When two soldiers tried to pin him between them, Cole dropped low, swept the legs of one, and used the falling body as a shield against the second. When a soldier got close enough to grab him, Cole did not try to break free with strength. He twisted, found the pressure point beneath the Dracorath's armored jaw, and pressed. The soldier's grip went slack and Cole put him down with a precise strike to the temple. It was not a fight. It was a lesson. Liara watched from the ground where she still knelt, her bound hands forgotten, her silver eyes wide with something she had never experienced before. She had seen Dracorath soldiers break down doors. She had seen them lift transport vehicles with their bare hands. She had seen them terrify her entire civilization into submission, with nothing more than their presence. And now she was watching a single creature, smaller than any of them, take them apart piece by piece with a calm precision that made the most dangerous warriors in the outer ring look like children swinging sticks. Cole did not kill any of them. Liara noticed this almost immediately. Every strike was calculated. Every blow was placed to disable, to incapacitate, to put down, not to end. The Dracorath soldiers fell one by one, groaning on the stone of the plaza, alive but unable to fight. Cole moved through them like a ghost, his staff spinning and crackling, his body twisting and turning with a fluidity that seemed impossible for a creature of his build. In less than 4 minutes, every soldier in the plaza was on the ground. 20 Dracorath warriors. Elite soldiers from a species that had conquered dozens of worlds. All of them down. And Cole was not even breathing hard. He stood in the center of the fallen soldiers, his staff resting across his shoulders, and looked at Voktharan. The Dracorath commander had not moved. He stood rooted to the spot, his blade still in his hand, his 4 red eyes locked on the human with an expression that Lyra had never seen on a Dracorath face before. It took her a moment to recognize it because she had only ever seen it in the mirror, on the faces of her own people, in the eyes of frightened children. It was fear. Cole did not press the advantage. He did not charge at the commander or taunt him or issue threats. He simply stood there, relaxed and patient, and let the silence do the talking. Seconds passed. Then Voktharan snarled something into the communication device on his wrist. He was calling for reinforcements. Cole heard the transmission. He understood it. His suit had a built-in translator that processed over 10,000 galactic languages in real time. He knew that Voktharan had just called for every available soldier in the occupation force to converge on the plaza. That meant hundreds of Dracorath warriors would be arriving within minutes. Cole looked at Liara. He walked over to her, knelt down, and pulled a small tool from his belt. He cut through her energy restraints with a quick motion and helped her to her feet. She was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming shock of everything she had just witnessed. Cole steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. His touch was surprisingly gentle for someone who had just dismantled 20 soldiers in 4 minutes. He asked her how many of her people were being held in the settlement. Lara found her voice. She told him thousands, maybe 10,000 in Sethara alone, more in the camps outside the city. Cole nodded as if she had just told him the weather. He asked her if there was somewhere safe she could lead them. Somewhere the Dracorath had not reached. Lyra thought about it. There were the deep caves beneath the crystal lakes to the north. The Velhani had used them for shelter during the great storms generations ago. They were vast, interconnected, and the mineral content in the rock would interfere with Dracorath's scanning equipment. She told Cole about them. He smiled, not the quiet, dangerous smile from before. This one was warmer. He told her that was perfect. Then his expression shifted, and he became serious. He told her that things were about to get much louder and much more dangerous. He told her that he needed her to be brave, braver than she had ever been. because her people were going to need someone to follow, and it could not be him. He was a stranger, an alien. They would not trust him, but they would trust her. The teacher who had saved 30 children, the woman who had stood in front of the Dracorath commander and refused to break. Lara wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that she was not a leader, not a fighter, not someone who could carry that kind of weight. But before she could speak, the sound of heavy footsteps began to echo from every street leading into the plaza. The reinforcements were coming. Cole stood up. He pressed something on his forearm, and his helmet slid back into place, the blue visor locking down over his eyes. He rolled his shoulders, adjusted his grip on his staff, and turned to face the approaching army. Then he paused and looked back at Lara one more time. He told her to get to the captives, free as many as she could, move north toward the lakes. He would buy her time. Liara asked him how much time. Cole considered the question seriously for a moment. Then he shrugged and said he would figure it out as he went. It was such a human answer that Lyra almost laughed despite everything. She ran. She did not look back. She ran through the plaza, past the groaning Dracorath soldiers, past the stunned and frozen Velhani captives, and she began to do what Cole had asked. She began to lead. She started with the nearest group of captives, about 60 Velhani who had been watching the entire scene from their knees. They were confused and terrified and disoriented. Lara grabbed the nearest one by the arm and pulled him to his feet. She told them to move. She told them to follow her. She told them there was a safe place and that someone was fighting to give them the chance to reach it. Some of them moved immediately. Others hesitated. But when the sounds of combat erupted behind them, the screams of Dracorath soldiers and the crackling discharge of Cole's staff and the thundering boom of something much larger being activated, the hesitation disappeared. They ran. Lyra moved through the streets of Sathara like a woman possessed. She knew every alley, every shortcut, every hidden path in the settlement. She had walked these streets every day for years, taking her students on nature walks, visiting families, exploring the old tunnels beneath the foundations. Now that knowledge became something else. It became a weapon. She led groups of freed captives through back passages that the Dracorath did not know existed. She found holding areas where guards had abandoned their posts, pulled away by the emergency call to the plaza, and she freed everyone inside. She organized runners to carry messages to the other groups. She sent the fastest Velhani ahead to scout the route to the northern lakes. She did everything that needed to be done, and she did it with a clarity and purpose that surprised even herself. Behind her, the battle raged. She could hear it across the entire settlement. The ground shook with impacts. Buildings cracked and crumbled. Plasma fire lit up the sky in flashes of green and orange, and through all of it she could hear something else. A sound she could not identify at first. It was only later, when she had a moment to think, that she realized what it was. It was Cole's voice. He was talking, not screaming battle cries or roaring challenges like a Dracorath warrior would. He was talking, casually, as if he were having a conversation. She caught fragments of it carried on the wind. He was commenting on the Dracorath fighting technique. He was suggesting improvements. He was impossibly giving them tips on how to attack him more effectively. And when those tips did not work, which they never did, he sounded genuinely disappointed. The Valahan who heard this as they fled through the streets did not know what to make of it. Some thought the human was insane. Others thought he was some kind of divine being sent to protect them. A few of the children who heard his distant voice decided that he was funny. Children, Lyra realized, had an instinct for truth that adults often lost. Cole was not insane, and he was not divine. He was something much simpler and much more terrifying to the Dracorath. He was having a good time. By the time Liara reached the outskirts of Sathara, she had gathered nearly 3,000 Velhana. They streamed out of the settlement in a long, winding column, moving north through the fields toward the crystal lakes. The elderly were supported by the young. Children were carried by anyone with free arms. The injured were helped along by those who could still walk. It was messy and disorganized and slow, but it was moving. They were moving. For the first time since the Dracorath arrived, the Velhani people were not being herded. They were choosing their own direction. Liara stationed herself at the rear of the column, refusing to leave until every last person had passed her. She kept looking back toward Sathara, toward the smoke and fire, and the distant sounds of a one-man war. She felt a knot in her chest that she could not untangle. Guilt. She was running while he fought. She was leading people to safety while he put his body between them and an army. She barely knew him. She did not even understand what he was, but the weight of what he was doing for her people, for strangers, sat on her shoulders like a mountain. A young Velhani boy appeared at her side. He was maybe 7 years old, small even by their standards, with wide silver eyes that were red from crying. He looked up at Lara and asked her who the man in the armor was. Lara knelt down so she was at his level. She thought about how to answer. She thought about the galactic species classifications she had read about in old educational texts. She thought about the legends and warnings that traders sometimes whispered about when they passed through the outer ring. She thought about Cole standing alone in a plaza full of enemy soldiers, smiling and asking if he could join. She told the boy that the man was a human. The boy asked what a human was. Liara looked back towards Sathara one more time. The sky above the settlement was glowing orange from fires and plasma discharge. The ground vibrated with the rhythm of a battle that should have been over in seconds but had now lasted nearly an hour. She told the boy that she was still figuring that out. They reached the crystal lakes as the first of the twin moons began to set. The entrance to the cave system was hidden behind a waterfall that cascaded down a cliff face of pale stone. The water was cold and clear, and it caught the moonlight in ways that made it look like liquid silver. Liara directed the column into the caves, organizing groups to explore the tunnels, find water sources, and establish safe areas for the children and injured. The caves were even larger than she remembered. They stretched deep into the earth, branching and winding through the bedrock in a network that could shelter tens of thousands. The mineral deposits in the walls gave off a faint natural luminescence, a soft blue glow that made the darkness less absolute. It was cold and damp and nothing like the comfortable homes they had left behind. But it was safe. Hours passed. More Velhani arrived in small groups, some guided by the runners Liara had sent out, others who had found their own way after escaping during the confusion. By morning, the cave system held over 5,000 souls. They were hungry, frightened, and lost. But they were alive and they were free. Lara organized everything she could: water distribution, medical care for the injured with what little knowledge they had, sleeping areas for the children, scouting teams to map the deeper tunnels. She worked without rest, moving from group to group, answering questions, offering comfort, making decisions that she had no training for but that needed to be made by someone. It was mid-morning of the next day when one of the scouts came running back from the cave entrance. He was out of breath and his silver eyes were wide. Lara's heart dropped. She assumed the Dracorath had found them. She was already trying to calculate escape routes through the deeper tunnels when the scout told her what he had seen. It was not the Dracorath. It was the human. He was walking toward the caves. Alone, on foot, Lyra ran to the entrance. She pushed through the waterfall and stepped out onto the rocky ledge overlooking the path that wound up from the lake shore. And there he was, Cole, walking up the path with the slow, steady pace of a man who had been walking for a very long time. His armor was damaged. The sleek, dark surface was scored with burns, dented in places, and the blue light lines that had glowed so brightly were now dim and flickering. His helmet was retracted, and she could see his face. There was a cut above his right eye that had bled down the side of his face and dried. His lip was split. He was limping slightly on his left leg. He looked like he had been through a war, because he had. He looked up and saw Liara standing on the ledge. He raised a hand in a casual wave, as if he were greeting a neighbor. Then he winced because raising his arm apparently hurt quite a bit, and he lowered it quickly. When he reached the ledge, he stopped and looked at Liara. She looked at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cole broke the silence in the most unexpected way possible. He asked if she had any water because he was really thirsty. Liara felt something crack inside her chest. Not pain, something else. The tight knot of tension and fear and determination that had been holding her together for the last day suddenly loosened, and she felt tears rolling down her blue cheeks. She was crying and laughing at the same time, which was a very confusing experience for someone who had never done both simultaneously. She led him into the caves. She brought him water and the little food they had managed to gather. Cole drank gratefully and ate slowly and did not say much. Around them, the Velhani watched with wide eyes. They had heard about what happened in the plaza. Word had spread through the refugees like wildfire. The human who fell from the sky. The human who fought an army. The human who smiled. After he had rested for a few minutes, Liara sat beside him and asked a question that had been burning in her mind since the moment he appeared. She asked him, why? Why did he come down? Why did he fight? Why did he risk his life for people he had never met, on a world he had no connection to, against an army he had no obligation to face? Cole was quiet for a long time. He stared at the faint blue glow of the cave walls as if he were looking for something in the light. Then he spoke, and his voice was softer than before, stripped of the casual humor he had used in the plaza. He told her that where he came from, there was an old idea. It was not a law. It was not a military doctrine. It was just something that humans carried with them, deep down, in a place that had nothing to do with logic or strategy or self-interest. The idea was simple. When you see someone who cannot defend themselves and you have the ability to stand between them and the thing that would destroy them, you'd do it. Not because you will be rewarded, not because it is safe, not because it makes sense. You do it because the alternative is walking away. And some things, Cole said quietly, are worse than dying. Walking away when you could have helped is one of them. Liara let the words settle in the silence of the cave. Around them, the Velhani listened. Every one of them. She looked at Cole, at the blood on his face and the damage on his armor and the exhaustion in his dark eyes, and she understood something fundamental. This was not a warrior, in the way the Dracorath were warriors. The Dracorath fought because they believed in power. Cole fought because he believed in people. And that difference, small as it sounded, was the difference between an empire that conquered worlds and a single man who could stand against it. She told Cole that the Dracorath would come. They would find the caves eventually. They had scanners, ships, hundreds of soldiers. This was not over. Cole nodded. He knew. Then he looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that was not calm or casual or amused. It was serious. Deeply, gravely serious. He told her she was right. The Dracorath would come. But when they did, things were going to be different, because Cole had not come to Velhari alone. He had come ahead, by himself, on purpose. Liara felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the cold of the caves. She asked him what he meant. Cole leaned back against the cave wall and closed his eyes. The faint blue light played across the scars on his face. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every Velhani in the cave heard it clearly. He told her that he had sent a signal before he dropped from orbit. A signal that traveled faster than any ship, faster than any weapon, faster than anything the Dracorath had. It was a specific frequency that humans used for a very specific purpose. It was a call that had not been sent in over a decade, a call that meant only one thing. Liara asked what it meant. Cole opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling of the cave, and despite everything, despite the blood and the pain and the exhaustion, that familiar quiet smile appeared on his face. He told her it meant that someone needed help, and humans always answered. 3 days passed inside the caves beneath the crystal lakes. 3 days of cold stone, dripping water, and the constant low hum of fear that vibrated through every Velhani huddled in the darkness. Liara had not slept more than a few hours in total. She moved through the tunnels like a ghost, checking on the injured, distributing the small amounts of food that scouting parties had brought back from the surface, answering questions she did not have answers to, and holding children who woke up screaming from nightmares about red eyes and burning villages. She was running on something beyond physical energy, something deeper. Something that had ignited in the plaza when she had watched a stranger fall from the sky and stand between her people and annihilation. Cole spent the 3 days doing something that confused the Velhani at first and then fascinated them. He was preparing. Not in the dramatic way the Dracorath prepared for battle, with roaring speeches and displays of physical dominance. Cole prepared quietly. He sat in a small alcove near the cave entrance, with pieces of his armor spread around him, repairing what he could with tools from a compact kit he carried on his belt. He recalibrated his shield generator. He recharged his staff from a power cell the size of his thumb. He stretched his injured leg through a series of careful movements that made the Velhani children giggle because some of the positions looked absurd. And he talked. Cole talked to anyone who came near him. He asked the Velhani about their world, their history, their families. He learned the names of children who were brave enough to approach him. He listened to elders tell stories about the old days before the invasion. He let a young girl braid a strand of decorative cord into the strap of his armor because she said it was a Velhani tradition for protecting warriors, and he wore it with the same seriousness he wore the rest of his equipment. He was, Lyra realized, doing something that no conqueror had ever done on Velhari. He was becoming part of the community. Not by force, not by authority, but by simply being present and caring. On the evening of the third day, Cole found Lyra sitting alone at the edge of an underground pool. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the blue luminescence of the mineral deposits in the ceiling like a mirror showing a sky full of alien stars. She was staring at the surface with the hollow expression of someone who had been strong for too long and was starting to feel the cracks forming. Cole sat down beside her without asking permission. For a while, they just sat in silence. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have been through something terrible together and do not need words to acknowledge it. Then Lyra spoke. She told Cole that she had been counting. Over 7,000 Velhani were now sheltered in the caves. 7,000 out of a population of nearly 2 million. She did not know what had happened to the rest. She did not know how many were still in the labor camps, how many had been moved off-world, how many were dead. The numbers sat in her mind like stones, heavy and immovable, and every time she closed her eyes she saw the faces of people she had not been able to save. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not tell her that everything would be okay. He did not offer empty reassurance or false hope. Instead, he told her something that surprised her. He told her about Earth. He told her about a time long before humans had reached the stars, when his species had faced its own darkest moments. He told her about wars that had consumed entire continents, about weapons that could erase cities in a flash of light, about periods in human history where it seemed certain that the species would destroy itself before it ever looked upward at the stars. He told her about the people who had survived those times, not the generals or the politicians or the warriors, the teachers, the healers, the ordinary people who had kept communities together through sheer stubborn refusal to let everything fall apart. He told her that those people had never believed they were heroes. They had never thought of themselves as strong or brave or exceptional. They had simply done what needed to be done because someone had to do it, and they were there. And the truth, Cole said quietly, was that those were the people who had actually saved humanity, not the soldiers, the teachers. Lyra felt the weight on her shoulders shift. It did not disappear, but it changed shape, became something she could carry, instead of something that was crushing her. She looked at Cole, at this strange, battered alien who talked about ancient Earth wars and complimented Velhani cooking and let children braid cords into his armor, and she realized that she trusted him completely, not because he was powerful, but because he was kind. She asked him when the signal would be answered. Cole checked a small device on his wrist. His expression shifted, and that familiar smile appeared, the one that was warm and dangerous at the same time. He told her to look up. Before Lyra could ask what he meant, the ground trembled, not with the heavy stomping rhythm of Dracorath soldiers. This was different. This was a vibration that came from above, from the sky, from the very atmosphere of the planet. It was deep and resonant, like the heartbeat of something impossibly large. Lyra scrambled to her feet and ran toward the cave entrance, Cole limping behind her. She burst through the waterfall and onto the ledge, the cold water soaking through her clothes, and she looked up. The sky was on fire, not with plasma or explosions or the burning trails of drop pods. The sky was on fire with light. Dozens of points of brilliant white light were descending through the atmosphere, each one trailing a tail of flame that stretched across the purple sky like brushstrokes on a canvas. They were ships. But they were not like any ships Lyra had ever seen. They were not like the brutal, angular warships of the Dracorath fleet. These were different, sleek and purposeful, built with the same aesthetic philosophy as Cole's armor, dark hulls with lines of blue light running along their surfaces. They moved with a precision that was almost beautiful, dropping into formation as they descended, spreading across the sky in a pattern that covered the entire visible horizon. Cole stepped up beside her on the ledge, the light from the descending fleet reflected in his dark eyes. He watched with an expression that was hard to read. Pride, maybe, relief. Something that went deeper than both. Lyra asked him how many ships there were. Cole told her that the initial response fleet was 42 ships. That included 12 heavy cruisers, 18 destroyers, 8 carrier-class vessels, and 4 command ships. He said it casually, the way someone might describe the contents of a grocery bag. But the number hit Liara like a physical force. The Dracorath had brought 200 ships to conquer Valhari. The humans had sent 42 in response to a single distress signal from one man on a forgotten world. And the way Cole said it, with that easy confidence, suggested that 42 was considered a light response. The Dracorath fleet in orbit reacted immediately. Their warships began repositioning, forming defensive clusters, powering weapons. Voktharen's voice crackled across every open communication channel, barking orders, demanding status reports, trying to organize his forces for a confrontation he had never expected and was completely unprepared for. He had conquered Valhari, expecting no resistance from anyone, let alone one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The human fleet did not attack immediately. Instead, a single transmission was broadcast on every frequency. In every language the Dracorath used, clear and unmistakable, it came from the lead command ship, a vessel called the Resolute. The message was spoken by a woman whose voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She identified herself as Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Navy, Outer Ring Response Division. She stated that the human fleet had responded to a distress call from a registered human operative on the planet below. She stated that evidence of unlawful occupation, mass imprisonment, and systematic abuse of a non-combatant civilian population had been documented. She gave the Dracorath fleet exactly 1 standard galactic hour to power down their weapons, release all captives, and begin withdrawal from Valhari space. She stated that failure to comply would be interpreted as an act of aggression against both the Valhani people and the United Earth Navy. Then she added something that was not part of standard military protocol. She said that the operative on the ground was a personal friend of hers. She said this in a tone that made it clear the information was not sentimental. It was a threat. The hour began. Inside the caves, the Velahan gathered around the entrance, looking up at the sky with expressions of stunned disbelief. Many of them were crying. Some were holding each other. Others were simply standing in silence, watching the human ships hang in the sky like guardians, their blue running lights cutting through the clouds. For the first time since the invasion, the Velhani did not feel hunted. Cole sat on the ledge with his legs dangling over the edge, eating something from a small ration pack that he had been saving. He offered some to Liara. She took it without thinking and put it in her mouth. It tasted terrible, like compressed dust with a hint of something that might once have been fruit. She made a face. Cole laughed, a real laugh that came from deep in his chest and echoed off the cliff walls. He admitted that human field rations were not their proudest achievement. Liara sat beside him. She had 1,000 questions. About Earth, about humans, about how a single species could be so simultaneously capable of violence and kindness. But she asked only one. She asked Cole what would happen if the Dracorath did not withdraw. Cole chewed his ration slowly and considered the question. Then he told her something that revealed a layer of humanity that the galaxy often missed because it was too focused on the fighting. He told her that humans did not want to fight the Dracorath. He said it without pretense, without false modesty. Humans did not enjoy war. They were good at it, terrifyingly good at it, but they did not enjoy it. Every human soldier carried the weight of their species' violent history like a scar on their collective soul. They fought when they had to. They fought to protect. They fought because the alternative was allowing innocent people to suffer, but they never celebrated it. And every time a conflict could be resolved without bloodshed, that was considered the real victory. 40 minutes into the hour, the Dracorath fleet began to move. Liara watched from the ledge, her heart hammering. The angular warships shifted formation, their weapons still hot, and for a terrible moment she thought they were preparing to attack. But then something changed. The weapons powered down. One by one, the Dracorath ships began to pull away from their positions in low orbit, climbing higher, forming a withdrawal pattern. Voktharan was many things: cruel, arrogant, and ruthless. But he was not stupid. He had done the calculations. He had reviewed the threat assessment for a human military response. He had seen what one human had done to his soldiers on the ground, and he had made the only rational decision available to him. The evacuation happened over the next 12 hours. It was not peaceful or dignified. The Dracorath soldiers left Sathara and the labor camps with the sullen, furious energy of predators denied their prey. They destroyed equipment they could not take with them. They set fires, They left messes and damage in their wake like petulant children throwing a tantrum. But they left. Every last one of them. The drop pods lifted. The transports rose. The warships engaged their hyperspace drives and vanished, leaving nothing behind but empty orbits and a lingering smell of ozone. When the last Dracorath ship disappeared from sensors, the Velhani in the caves did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply stood together in the blue luminescence of the underground caverns, holding each other, and wept. They wept for what they had lost, for the people who had not survived, for the villages that were burned and the lives that were broken, and the innocence that could never be fully restored. They wept because they were alive and free, and they had not been sure they would ever be either of those things again. The human fleet remained in orbit. Over the following days, shuttles descended from the carriers, bringing supplies, medical equipment, food, and personnel trained in disaster relief and reconstruction. The humans set up field hospitals. They distributed clean water. They helped clear rubble from the damaged settlements. They did it efficiently, professionally, and without asking for anything in return. The Velhani watched these aliens work among them with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. These were the same species that had sent a fleet capable of destroying the Dracorath armada, and here they were, carrying boxes of medical supplies, helping rebuild homes. She translated. She organized. She served as the bridge between her people and the human relief teams, navigating the cultural differences and misunderstandings that inevitably arose when two species who had never met tried to help each other. She was good at it. Cole had been right. She was a teacher, and teaching was just another form of building bridges between those who did not yet understand each other. Cole stayed on the surface. His injuries were treated by a human medic who scolded him loudly for not seeking treatment sooner and who informed him that he had 3 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in his left shin, and more bruises than she could count. Cole took the scolding with the sheepish acceptance of someone who had heard it many times before. When the medic told him he should be on bed rest for 2 weeks, he waited until she left and then went right back to work. On the 5th day after the withdrawal, Admiral Chen came down to the surface to inspect the relief operations. She was a small woman, shorter than Liara, with sharp dark eyes and silver-streaked black hair cut close to her head. She moved through the ruined settlement with the focused attention of someone who was cataloguing every detail for a report that would be read by people with the power to do something about it. When she found Cole, she stopped and looked at him for a long moment. Then she punched him in the shoulder hard enough that he winced. She told him that he was reckless, insubordinate, and completely insane. Then she hugged him. It was brief and fierce and entirely contradicted the stern expression on her face. She asked him why he had gone down alone instead of waiting for the fleet. Cole told her the truth. He told her that there was a woman in a plaza with a blade above her head, and he did not have time to wait. Chen looked at him with an expression that mixed exasperation with something that might have been pride. She told him that his report was going to be a nightmare. He told her he would buy her a drink. She told him he was buying the whole fleet drinks. He agreed that this was fair. Liara met the Admiral later that day in what remained of the Great Plaza. The stone was cracked and scorched from the battle. The makeshift throne where Varktharan had sat was gone, dismantled by Velhani who wanted no trace of the Dracorath command in their sacred space. Chen walked the plaza with Liara, listening as the young Velhani woman described what had happened. The arrival, the occupation, the captivity, the resistance, the execution that never happened because a human fell from the sky with a smile and a question. Chen listened to all of it without interrupting. When Liara finished, the Admiral was quiet for a moment. Then she told Lyra something that the young teacher would carry with her for the rest of her life. She told her that what the Velhani had endured was not weakness. Surviving was not weakness. Keeping your people alive, keeping hope alive, in the face of overwhelming force was one of the bravest things any species could do. She told Lara that she reminded her of someone. When Lyra asked who, Chen looked across the plaza to where Cole was helping a group of Velhani workers clear debris, his cracked ribs apparently forgotten. She said the resemblance was obvious. In the weeks that followed, Velhari began to heal. It was slow and painful and uneven, the way all healing is. Villages were rebuilt, fields were replanted. The crystal lakes reflected the purple sky again, undisturbed by the shadows of warships. The Velhani who had been scattered across the planet and beyond were slowly found and brought home. Not all of them. Some had been taken too far. Some were lost in ways that could not be undone, but everyone who could be reached was reached, because the humans had made a quiet promise that they would not stop looking. The galactic community took notice. The Dracorath withdrawal from Valhari was reported across every major news network in the civilized galaxy. The story spread fast and grew with each retelling. A tiny world on the edge of nothing. A peaceful species with no military. A single human who dropped from the sky into the middle of an execution and changed everything. The story was debated, analyzed, and discussed in governments and military academies and crowded bars on station decks across 1,000 systems. Some species admired the humans for what they had done. Some feared them more than ever. Some questioned whether the response had been proportional, whether the humans had the right to intervene on a world that was not theirs. In a conflict they had not been invited into, the humans did not particularly care about the debate. They had their own answer to the question of why they did what they did, and it was the same answer Cole had given Lara in a cold cave beneath a crystal lake. You stand because someone has to. You fight because the alternative is letting the darkness win. And you do it knowing that it will cost you, that it will hurt, that it might break you. Because the day you stop caring about a stranger's suffering is the day you stop being worthy of the strength you carry. Cole stayed on Valhari for 2 months. He helped with the reconstruction. He trained a small group of Valhani volunteers in basic self-defense, not to turn them into soldiers, but to give them the confidence that comes from knowing you are not completely helpless. He sat with elders and listened to their songs. He visited the schools as they reopened and let the children ask him endless questions about Earth. What was water like on his planet? Did humans really come in different colors? Why was he so tall? Could all humans fight like he did? He answered every question with patience and honesty. No, he told them. Not all humans could fight like he did. But every human, from the smallest child to the oldest grandmother, carried inside them the same stubborn refusal to give up that had brought him to Valhari. It was not a superpower. It was not magic. It was just what humans were. On the day he left, Lara walked with him to the shuttle that would take him back to his ship in orbit. The twin moons were high in the sky, casting double shadows across the rebuilt streets of Sithara. The plaza had been restored, and in its center, the Valhani had placed something new. A simple stone marker, carved by their finest artisans, inscribed with words in both the Valhani language and the human language called English. The words were the ones Cole had spoken in the cave. When you see someone who cannot defend themselves, and you have the ability to stand between them and the thing that would destroy them, you do it. Lyra stood at the base of the shuttle ramp with Cole and did not try to hide the tears on her face. She told him that her people would remember what he did, that they would tell the story for generations. The children in her school would grow up knowing that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, there was a species that answered when strangers called for help. Cole looked at her with those dark, tired, kind eyes. He told her that they were not strangers anymore. Then he reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out something small. It was the braided cord that the little girl had woven into his armor strap on the first day in the caves. He had removed it carefully, preserving every knot. He placed it in Liara's hand and closed her fingers around it. He told her to give it back to him the next time he visited. She laughed through her tears and told him he had better come back then. He told her that humans always came back for the people they cared about. He walked up the ramp. The shuttle door closed. The engines hummed and the craft lifted off the ground, rising into the purple sky until it was just another point of light among the stars. Lyra watched it until it disappeared. Then she looked down at the braided cord in her hand, felt its warmth against her palm, and smiled. She turned and walked back into Sithara. There was work to do, schools to rebuild, children to teach, a world to put back together. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in a place that glowed with the same stubborn warmth she had first seen in a human's eyes, she knew something with absolute certainty. She was not defenseless anymore. None of them were. Not because of the fleet in orbit or the weapons the humans carried or the threat of military force, but because they had learned something from a battered man who fell from the sky with a smile and 5 impossible words. They had learned that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to stand up anyway. It was the choice to protect someone who could not protect themselves. It was the quiet, unbreakable human belief that no one in this vast, dark, beautiful universe should ever have to face the darkness alone. And the Valhani, the gentle people of a small world at the edge of everything, carried that lesson forward. They built. They grew. They healed. And when, years later, another small world on the edge of the outer ring sent out a distress call as warships appeared in their sky, it was a Velhani ship that answered first, a ship crewed by the children Lyra had taught, by the volunteers Cole had trained, by a generation that had learned from a human what it meant to choose to be brave. And when they arrived, when they descended through the atmosphere of a world not their own to stand between the helpless and the powerful, they sent a message on every open frequency, a message in their own language, and in English, and in every galactic tongue they knew. The message was simple. Can we join? And across the galaxy, in a small apartment on a green and blue world called Earth, a man with grey in his beard and a scar on his jaw and a braided cord hanging from his wall heard the news. He sat down in his chair by the window, looked out at the night sky, and smiled. The same smile. Warm and quiet and full of the knowledge that the most powerful force in the universe was not a weapon or a fleet or an empire. It was the simple, stubborn, unbreakable choice to care, and it had spread the way all good things do, from one heart to another, across the stars, until the darkness itself began to shrink, not because someone forced it to retreat, but because enough people, on enough worlds, in enough quiet moments chose to stand. And that was enough. That was always enough.